Imagine being 8 years old. A woman you have never met comes to your street in London's East End. She tells you she works for a charity. She tells you that you are going somewhere better. She tells you there are families waiting who want children like you. You board a ship. 6 weeks later, you arrive in Canada. There is no family waiting. There is a farm. There is a farmer you have never met. There is a list of chores that begins before sunrise. There is no school. There is no way to contact your mother. And when you try to run, there is nowhere to go because you are 9 years old in a country you have never seen, and you do not know a single person within 1,000 miles. That is not a story someone invented. That is testimony given to a parliamentary inquiry by real people about something that was done to them by real organizations funded by the British government. Between 1869 and 1939, over 100,000 children were shipped from Britain to Canada under a program that was called Child Rescue. Most of them were not orphans. Most of them had living parents, and most of them were put to work on farms the moment they arrived. Here is what no history class will ever tell you. This program was not built on compassion. It was not built on desperation. It was built on a calculation. Britain had a problem. Its cities were full of poor children. Workhouses were overcrowded. Maintaining a child in a British institution was expensive. Shipping that same child to Canada and placing them with a farming family cost a fraction of that. The charities facilitating the transfers received government funding. The shipping lines were paid. The Canadian farms received labor they did not have to pay for. The children were not paid. They were called home children because they went from a charity's home in Britain to a receiving home in Canada. The name made it sound like something generous. The reality was documented by a government inspector in 1875 who traveled to Canada specifically to see what was happening to them. His name was Andrew Doyle. He worked for the British Poor Law Board. What he found was not rescue. Annie MacPherson was the first. In the summer of 1869, she sent 500 children from London to Montreal. They came from her homes, from workhouses, from reformatories. Some were gathered directly from the streets and put on the ship. She opened receiving homes in Belleville and Galt in Ontario. From there, the children were distributed to farms across rural Canada. Maria Rye came next. She refurbished an old jail in Niagara-on-the-Lake and called it Our Western Home. By the turn of the century, she had sent 5,000 children, mostly girls, to Ontario. Then came Dr. Thomas John Barnardo. He would become the largest operator of the scheme. By the time his organization finished, Barnardo's alone had sent 35,000 children to Canada. He sent thousands more to Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. At its peak, 44 different organizations were operating child immigration schemes simultaneously. They had different names, different founders, different stated missions. They shared one business model: take poor children from Britain, ship them to the colonies, place them with families who needed domestic servants and farm laborers, collect the government funding, and move on to the next shipment. In 1874, the London Board of Governors sent Andrew Doyle to Canada to inspect what was happening to the children. He spent months visiting farms, receiving homes, and the children themselves. His report, published in 1875, praised the intentions of the organizers, and then it condemned everything else. He wrote that because of the lack of supervision and follow-up once children were placed, thousands of British children, already in painful circumstances, were cast adrift to be overworked or mistreated by the settlers of early Canada. Cast adrift, those are the words he used. In an official government report in 1875, the House of Commons in Canada set up a committee to examine his findings. The controversy was significant, and then the program continued for another 64 years, not with minor adjustments, not with meaningful oversight. It continued almost exactly as before, with new organizations joining and the numbers of children increasing decade by decade. Here is the detail I cannot stop thinking about. Doyle's report was filed in 1875. The program was not terminated in Canada until 1939. In Australia, it was not terminated until 1970. That means that 95 years after a government inspector documented that thousands of children were being cast adrift to be overworked or mistreated, the last child was shipped under the same framework. Dr. Thomas Barnardo is the most famous name associated with the scheme. His organization still exists today as a children's charity. The official history presents him as a hero. The documented record is more complicated. Early in his career, Barnardo pleaded guilty to falsifying photographs of children to make their rescue appear more dramatic than it was. He was taken to court over 80 times on charges including kidnapping and neglect. In several documented cases, parents whose children had been taken by Barnardo's sought to have them returned. The courts issued writs of habeas corpus. In response, Barnardo preemptively shipped at least 2 of the children to Canada before the court orders could be served. He told the courts he did not know where the children were. The parents never got their children back. Those children are in the records. Their names are in the ship manifests. They arrived in Canada as wards of an organization that had kidnapped them from parents who were legally trying to recover them. And they were placed on farms. Here is the formula. A government identifies children in care as a budget problem. It funds charitable organizations to remove them. The charitable organizations frame removal as rescue. The children are shipped to colonies that need labor. The charities receive government grants for each child transferred. When reports of abuse emerge, the program continues because it saves money and serves colonial labor needs. And when a government inspector documents that children are being overworked and mistreated, the response is a parliamentary committee, and then business as usual for another 6 decades. The financial arrangement was straightforward. Canada needed agricultural labor. Britain needed to reduce the cost of caring for poor children. The charities connected supply to demand and took a percentage. The Empire Settlement Act of 1922 provided direct government funding to the organizations facilitating the transfers. It cost the British government significantly more to keep a child in a British institution than to pay a charity to ship that child to Canada and place them with a farm family. That calculation drove every decision. The language of rescue was the packaging. The spreadsheet was the product. Some of the children tried to contact their families. The receiving homes controlled the mail. Letters sent by parents in Britain were sometimes intercepted before they reached the children. Letters written by children were sometimes never sent. Researchers tracing individual cases have found letters in institutional archives. Letters that were filed rather than forwarded. Filed in organizational records. Never delivered. One man who was sent to Canada from a children's home in Scotland at age 7 discovered as an adult that his mother had been writing to him the entire time he was in Canada. He had received none of the letters. He had believed for decades that she had not tried to find him. The letters were in the archive. His story was not unusual. The Child Migrants Trust, which was established in 1987 specifically to reunite former child migrants with their families, documented this pattern across hundreds of cases. Parents who had been told their children were placed with good families in Canada, children who had been told their parents were dead or had abandoned them. Both of them were told something that was not true, by the same institutions, at the same time, deliberately. Laurie Oshevsky, founder of the British Home Children Advocacy and Research Association, described the mechanism that made it work. Once a child was placed in one of these organizations, the parents forfeited their rights. If you wanted your child back, the onus was on you to prove you were a fit parent. If you did prove that, you could be forced to repay the organization all the money they spent on the child. The average parent could not afford to do that. The organizations had structured the system so that reclaiming your own child was financially impossible for the families who had been forced to give them up in the first place. Poor parents lost their children because they were poor. Then they were told they could have them back if they could prove they were not poor. The proof required money they did not have. In the meantime, the children were on ships. Around 4 million people alive today are descended from a British home child. That is approximately 10% of Canada's current population. Most of them do not know it. The home children were taught to be ashamed of their origins. They were told they were charity cases. They were told their families had not wanted them. Many of them never spoke about what had happened to them. They built lives in Canada, raised children, grew old, and died without telling their descendants where they had actually come from. The records exist. Over 83,000 names are registered in the Home Children Canada Registry. The Library and Archives of Canada holds passenger lists, institutional records, and placement registers. The names are there. The ships are there. The farms are there. What is not always there is the truth of what happened to the children after they arrived. The follow-up visits that Doyle criticized in 1875 for being inadequate remained inadequate for the duration of the program. Children were placed and left. Whether they were well or ill-treated depended entirely on the family they landed with. Many were treated decently, many were not. The institution had no mechanism to tell the difference and no financial incentive to find out. In February 2010, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown issued a formal apology to the families of children who suffered under child migration programs. In his apology, he acknowledged that the children had been let down by the country that should have been their friend. He thanked Margaret Humphreys, the social worker from Nottingham, who had spent decades reuniting child migrants with their families, for her work in exposing what had been done. Canada did not apologize. The immigration minister stated that Canada preferred to recognize that sad period in other ways. The sad period began in 1869. The last children arrived in Canada in 1939. The last children arrived in Australia in 1970. The apology came in 2010. Between Doyle's report in 1875 and the British apology in 2010, 135 years passed. For 135 years, the documented evidence that children had been cast adrift to be overworked or mistreated sat in official records. Parliamentary committees were formed, reports were written, the program continued, and somewhere in Canada, right now, there is a person in their 80s or 90s who was 8 years old when they boarded a ship in Britain and arrived on a farm they had never seen, surrounded by people they had never met, with no way to reach the family they had left behind. Some of them are still looking for answers. Some of them found their families too late. And not one person who designed this program, who funded it, who operated it, or who intercepted the letters was ever held accountable. Not one.